Hi, my name is Talia. Welcome to Talia Nerds Out. Now, the main reason I made this video, besides to, hit everyone's comments, because I do feel bad that I can't answer anybody right now. Let me take a drink. I do feel bad that I can't answer anybody right now except via video. But the main focus of this video was to be directed at Vinod Vagadurgi. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Vinod, I hope I'm saying that right. So, I don't know if that's a male name or a female name. I'm really sorry. I'm going to say he unless I know otherwise. Please let me know if I said that wrong. But, okay, so he asked what I like most about Tolkien. And I actually haven't prepared really. I'm just going to kind of go off the cuff. First of all, I wasn't ready for Tolkien when I first read him. I first tried reading him, I probably was about the same time as I was starting to read Agatha Christie. Agatha Christie took a lot better for me because her style is very different. I might have to do something on her later and some Golden Age authors. But for Tolkien, when I first started, I actually think I was a little bit older when I started Tolkien. I'm trying to remember when the first movie came out, because I seem to remember, even though I was reading it before the movies came out, I seem to remember that they came out while I was reading it, which kind of made me want to read them more, but I couldn't really get into them. I think I was a little bit young the first time I tried to read these. The style is very difficult, I think, for a kid with a short attention span. Just saw Janelle. Janelle has a notification just popped up on my screen. My Christie's Missing Readathon to be read. # Team Marvel. Okay, I will have to watch it as soon as I'm done here because I just finished reading rereading Miss Marple, so I look forward to watching that, Janelle. But sorry, focus. Focus. I probably shouldn't have set my notifications to pop up on my screen. But yes, so I was not ready to read this when I was a preteen because the style is of an older style, and he is going for the idea of this is from an older time period. So the language is going to match that. It's supposed to be from a time period where, just starting to burst into song wouldn't have seemed that weird. We're having poetry. Wouldn't have seemed that odd. It's a very different world, and when you're a younger kid, the pace doesn't move fast enough. So I wasn't ready at first. Now, I reread the books as an adult, and I think each time I've reread them, I've appreciated them more. And one of the things that did help me, especially more recently, is when I started getting into TolkienTube. And I forget how I even started. Something must have popped up on my feed, my recommendations, you liked this, so you probably are going to like this kind of thing. And they started talking about things like the Silmarillion and about the background, and getting the backstory really helped me appreciate the full world, because now certain things began to click. And at that point too, I also had developed an interest in mythology, particularly Norse mythology, which Tolkien was also highly influenced by. And now, when I go and look at aspects of the Silmarillion, I can see that influence in there. I can see that influence in the Rohirrim. So it makes it a deeper narrative for me to know the background of the world, to have a feel for what makes these characters the way they are. So the world building is a very amazing thing about Tolkien, which is saying something because I tend to be very character driven, which is why when I make my complaints about the movies, all of my complaints are not visual. Honestly, Peter Jackson made a gorgeous video with the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Absolutely gorgeous. But, so if you notice, none of my nitpicks are about the way the scenery looks or anything like that. Because as a general rule, I don't picture scenery in my head, which is why having Alan Lee's artwork or Tolkien's artwork in the books is actually helpful to me, particularly if they show, like, areas that they're going. Like, I think I mentioned for the Hobbit book, you would see the path leading up to the Elven King's fortress, palace, whatever. And so therefore it's like, oh, that's what that area looks like. I never even pictured in my head because that is not something that I'm really good at. If you were to ask me after I left a place, oh, what did that look like? I would be really hard pressed to tell you. Even in everyday life, something would have had to stand out for me. I just tend to be more character driven. So that's what generally pulls me. And these characters are really awesome. Now, The Hobbit is the first one that I was able to really get a connection with, probably because it was written for children, initially, Tolkien's children. So it was an easier segue into the other books, which is why I was so disappointed when the Hobbit movies were so ruined, especially when they did such a good job with the actually with most of the sections that were focused on Bilbo, like actually focused on him being my video just tried to turn off. Okay, sorry about that. The sections that were actually focused on Bilbo being a hero of his own story, as he should have been, those sections were absolutely amazing. And that's why, so when I had seen the trailer with them singing, that was so amazing. And because it captured the feeling of what it was in this first chapter. And this, honestly, when you're coming into The Hobbit, you get a really good picture. Even me, like, I don't picture things, but Tolkien builds this world for you. And when you get to know his style, you can see where there's a little bit of humor in it, but it's not, over the top humor. It's not even like it's sardonic humor all throughout, because he writes, it's proper grammar, excuse me. The stories he writes, they do not lend themselves to a wry humor throughout. They're very serious stories. They're very dark stories. So his writing style is not going to sound like someone like Jane Austen's, where she's kind of poking fun at the society around her. She's making social commentary. Tolkien's building a world that is entrenched in war. It's entrenched in tragedy. And it's just full of all this truly dark things, which is why the fact that there are people who don't give Tolkien enough credit, who just are like, oh, he's, just very black and white, and like, it's just such a simple story. I don't think they read the same Tolkien that I did, because Tolkien, when he goes through his books, he shows the after effects of war on his characters. Because I think it was George R.R. Martin, the guy who wrote the books that the Game of Thrones are based off of. I think it was him who made the comment about Tolkien not covering, the grittier details, or covering, what is Aragorn's, plan for dealing with the orcs. And I think that was his example, which is, first of all, Mr. Martin, you're standing on Tolkien's shoulders, because he built the fantasy genre the way that you're getting to play with right now. So a little respect would be nice. And maybe I misunderstood it, but it just kind of, like, it's the same thing that annoys me when people are disrespectful. Like, you'll see people who are, I think it was a podcast called I think it was Sawbones was the name of the podcast, where it's a doctor and her husband that they go back and sometimes they handle respect people. A lot of times they're making fun of old medical practices, which drives me nuts because, again, guess what? You are standing on the shoulders of these people. They did the experimentation, they did the learning, and they worked with what they had, and then they moved past that. They got you to where you were. You didn't get yourself through those periods of time. You were, we are all building on top of who came before us. So let's have a little respect for who came before us. Yes, it might seem crazy to us now, but that's what they had to deal with. So it always bugs me if there's not a respect for authors who came before, for anything that came before. If it's just like there's a mockery of it, it's like, well, hang on, let's take a look and see like what they had to deal with at that time and what they were for the time that they lived in. But anyway, sorry about that. But not only that, like I said, I might have only caught the quote out of context, and I will be completely transparent about that. I possibly am judging without getting the whole picture. But the quote by itself, if it is in the context that as I believe it is, it's not doing Tolkien justice, because Tolkien does show the after effects of war. I think, if I remember correctly, what George R. R. Martin was saying, basically, it's just, or maybe it wasn't him, it's just generally it's assumed, like, and Tolkien just says, once Aragorn was king, it was just, wonderful because he was good. Well, I mean, it wasn't just because he's like, yeah, he's just a good guy, so he's automatically good at ruling. I mean, he knew this was what he was going to be. It's not like he just was thrown into this. So he would have thought about, he was already a leader. He already knew about how to handle people. So it wasn't like someone took, like, Arthur. It's like, look, you pulled that, sword out of the stone and, now you're automatically a good king. If you wanted to make an argument for that, okay, maybe. I mean, but it's mythology and it's, a different time period. But still, okay, you could argue that, it's kind of weird that Arthur might be really great all of a sudden. But I seem to remember actually Arthur wasn't, but that's a whole other thing. But for Aragorn, even though he didn't go into depth, that wasn't what the story was about. You reached the point where you needed to go, and that's where Aragorn's story really ends. There's some hints of some other things. I believe, I'm not sure if it's appendices or some of Tolkien's letters, because I haven't read Tolkien's letters, where they talk about the fact that, there are other things that he might have done, but it's not really the focus. But you do see the after effects of war. You see the darkness of how it affects Frodo. You see but you see the good and the bad. You see, like, Pippin and Merry elevated by their part in the war. They gained a whole lot of self-confidence. They gained a lot of status. So for them, they were war heroes that came back, and it improved their lives greatly. Even Sam, when he comes back, he becomes mayor multiple times. They consider him like a real hero in Hobbiton because, his gift from Galadriel really helped Hobbiton become beautiful again after it had been so destroyed. And that's another thing. Hobbiton got wrecked. It was the scouring of the Shire and completely wrecked by Saruman, who had an issue with the hobbits, and he just went and he destroyed Hobbiton because he could. And that is, like, I believe, you saw that when soldiers came back home, and they would come, and there were the effects of the war on home as well. I'm thinking in particular with the bombing of England, where you come home and, there is yeah, there's the wounds, there's scars of war even at home. You can see where, buildings have been affected, and just, you didn't escape the war when you came home. It wasn't safe. It, you didn't, they didn't come from the battlefield to where the way they remembered home. And that's exactly what happens for the hobbits. Because I believe it's the quote at the beginning of the Fellowship where Frodo says that, he doesn't want to go on this journey, but if he can keep the Shire safe, keep the Shire as it is now, it will all be worth it. But when he comes back, it's not as he left it. It's not what he hoped it would be. And when it is restored, there's no place for him anymore. And soldiers did experience this. They'd come home, they'd come wounded, both psychologically and physically. And the world that they had worked so hard to save, the country they worked so hard to save, there was no place for them anymore. They couldn't work the way they used to. They had PTSD, even though they didn't know what that was at the time. And they just didn't fit in anymore. And it was very sad. And that is what happened to Frodo. Frodo is permanently damaged by what happened to him when he was traveling with the ring, when he destroyed the ring. Those scars are always on him, physically and emotionally. And he doesn't get the same respect as the other hobbits because he had already started pulling back. He didn't really want to be terribly involved in leading people or anything like that. When he came back, he was tired. He had been through so much, and he let Pippin, there were some points where he did a little bit of leading, but he really let Pippin and Merry lead things, and that's why Pippin and Merry and then Sam were lifted so high above Frodo. Frodo just sort of got forgotten, which is, I think that did happen to sometimes the soldiers when they came back. They weren't always as appreciated maybe as they could have been, especially if they were damaged. So for anyone to say that Tolkien doesn't cover what happens after, all you have to do is look at Frodo. And Frodo's journey is, it took me a long time to appreciate Frodo. Partially because I don't particularly like Elijah Wood's depiction of him. And that might be partially direction or whatever. It might not be completely his fault. But it took me a long time to appreciate Frodo. Because as a kid, you look at Frodo and you're like, you were so, you're bland, you were so weak, you weren't able to do this. You're not as interesting as the other people around you. And that's simply not true. Frodo is a very interesting character. He has a humor that I didn't pick up on when I was younger. And yet he's also very learned. You see that with his interactions with the elves. You also see he has a dogged strength. It's not like, he's not as brash as Pippin can be. Merry's not particularly brash. Merry has definite leadership skills. Merry has a nice skill set. Someone pointed out on TolkienTube that they saw Merry is kind of like a mini Strider. Like, he shows a lot of interest in, figuring out how to get places, the best way best paths to find. I'm not sure if I see it quite the same way they did, but I do think that Merry is very intelligent and got a bit of a bad rap in the movie because he is an interesting character in his own right. But back to Frodo. Frodo, his depth is amazing, and you really see the journey of the soldier who has so much to deal with, and where the war just psychologically and physically takes everything. But I never appreciated Frodo's strength. And yet, the way he describes the ring, once it gets closer and closer to Mordor, as this weight, it's like almost like he couldn't breathe. It really it says a lot about his character that he was able to get that far, especially since even Bilbo, who wasn't doing the kind of things that Frodo was, where Frodo was going to destroy it. The ring had a sense of self-preservation and knew where to go. I'm giving it qualities as if it was sentient. It was just attracted to doing what was Sauron's will. It was attracted to bringing out the worst in people and bringing Sauron's plans into fruition. But when it was locked away with Bilbo in the Shire, there were not really that many opportunities to corrupt Bilbo to grab some sort of power because he was in the Shire. What opportunities were there? And even so, it still affected Bilbo because he still, when Frodo showed him the ring, he tried to snatch it from him. He still saw it as Gollum did, his precious, but he realized, I am becoming Gollum, and he did pull away. And the same thing happens to Frodo because you can't carry that kind of evil with you for any period of time and not be affected by it. And I think that's a good thing. That's the other thing. Tolkien doesn't intend to have a message throughout there, but in the way that his characters interact and in the way they speak and the way that things affect them, you can see partially how Tolkien sees the world, but also you see where mercy has its effects later down the line. That when you put good into the world, it will come back and help you when you most need it. It's, in spite of all the darkness, there is that positive message. Bilbo's mercy of keeping Gollum alive, and then later Frodo's mercy of keeping Gollum alive, and then even later Sam's mercy of keeping Gollum alive is the only reason they were able to complete their mission, because there was mercy, mercy, mercy. Oh, and even in between that, okay, so you have Bilbo's mercy, then you have actually between Bilbo and Frodo, you have the mercy of the elves in Mirkwood, who they treated him perhaps with too much kindness, which allowed him to escape. But if he did not escape, he would not have been where he needed to be at Mordor to make the destruction of the ring happen. So even though mercy would seem to initially be the cause of tragedy, when you pull back and look at the full picture, you can see where it was a line of mercy that led to the outcome, which is a great message and also a very Christian message, not only because it's a message of hope, but because it shows, okay, there is another plan to this, even though we don't see it. It's what Tolkien refers to as your doom. Even though that has a negative connotation, he uses it in all sorts of contexts. I believe he called I want to say it was the relationship with Beren and Luthien. It was her doom to fall for Beren. I believe is how it's used. Again, I haven't actually gotten to that point where I've read it, but I believe it's how it's used. So there is a sort of feeling like, okay, someone has a plan. Of course, if you read the Legendarium, you know that's Ero Ilúvatar. But, so yeah, I like the deeper message. I like that people who behave decently, even though they don't seem to be rewarded at first, there ends up being an ultimate reward. Now, that doesn't mean they don't leave damaged. There are always consequences to what happens to us, whether it's something we chose or something that affected us in some other way. There's just always going to be consequences. And the consequence of this war for Frodo, of carrying this ring for so long, is PTSD, essentially. And besides the emotional damage, is he's never going to recover from that spirit wound, that physical wound that occurred when he got stabbed by the not Barrow-wights, by the Nazgul. It was the king of Nazgul. I can't bring his name out of my head right now, but it was there and it just left again. Okay, I'll think about it later. But yeah, when he got stabbed like that, that wound stays. That emotional effect stays. I think it even hurt again at the anniversary of when he got stabbed. But it, his choice of putting the ring on, even though he knew that he shouldn't, even though he knew he should avoid the temptation to do so, when he put on that ring, when the ring race were right there, when Nazgul were there, they could see him on the same plane, and that was when they were able to stab him. So the side effect of his not resisting temptation was to carry this consequence for the rest of his life, this wound for the rest of his life, because he wasn't able to resist. And when you look at Frodo in that way, he's just he's a character you can actually, you can feel for, if you maybe even see yourself in, because he's not just a one-dimensional character. He's a character that has many facets, but he's ultimately a character who took on a task that no one else could have, really, because they were too powerful and the ring would have corrupted them, or because they might not have been able to carry the weight of it. And by the way, one of my favorite quotes from this, well, there's a lot of good quotes in here, but there was one I used for a very long time when I first got sick, because it was the only way I could describe the way I felt. And it was a quote from Bilbo. Actually, I used a lot of Tolkien quotes during a certain time period, because I was working night shifts, and when I'd come out into the light, I'd be like, "It burns, precious, it burns us." But anyhow, it's book 1, and Bilbo is talking. Oh wait, this is the right book. To Gandalf, and he's about to hand the ring. He's supposed to put the ring on the mantelpiece, and he's talking about the ring and how he needs to give it up. And they're talking about how, you look young, and he's like, "I don't feel young. I feel more, I think this is like well preserved." And the quote is, if I can find it, something to the effect of, "I feel like too little butter spread over too much bread." And when I didn't know what was happening to me physically, that was a quote that kept coming to mind. And if that is even a teensy bit of what Frodo was feeling, because he carried it so much longer than Bilbo, and actually, I think, put it on for longer periods of time, because I think Bilbo would only pop it on, like if he saw the Saxful Baggins is coming by or something. He wasn't constantly wearing it. Whereas Frodo, when he put it on, it was a lot of times in very dangerous situations, and it would be for more than a couple minutes. And also, the ring was actively trying to corrupt him, because he was going to destroy it. So, if it gives an idea of how that ring must have been affecting Frodo, if Bilbo could feel that way about it. And I'd also heard it described, I'm not sure if it was booktube or something else I read, where because a mortal wasn't supposed to really have the ring, it would do different things for different people. It was supposed to have certain effects for immortals, but because with mortals, you weren't really supposed to have that. It's, yeah, it made your life longer, but because you weren't supposed to have an immortal life, it's just made you feel thinner. It made you feel just like you were almost like a ghost. And that's what exactly happened to the Nazgul. They actually became that because it was a false immortality. And like I said, Tolkien puts so many, his world building is so intense, and you don't really get it until you start reading things like Silmarillion and really start looking into his world. But I really grew to appreciate Frodo later. Then there's Sam, who is just an amazing character overall. Sam is a lot of times your voice of the normal guy who's just like, he's not carrying the same load, although he will pick up the load if he needs to. He's incredibly loyal, incredibly down to earth. There's nothing bad to say about Sam, but Sam is also not a character that, whereas with Frodo, you can go off about him for a long time because Frodo has a lot going on with him. But Sam's that character you always kind of want to be because he's just a loyal person. He's a really good person. He's, he knows what his limitations are, but if he can't carry that load, he will make it so you're carrying the load is easier. Just an amazing person. Then we go on to Pippin and Merry. And Pippin and Merry are a little bit more difficult because Pippin has a definite character growth through the book. Because when we meet him, he's barely out of his... No, he's not out of his tweens. He's still in his tweens. So he's essentially a kid. And he does some stupid things like kids do. But we do see him grow up over the period of the books as he sees war. And that's, you do see him doing things like thinking to drop his, the clasp of his cloak so that someone would find it, so the Aragorn would be able to track them. So he was thinking as much as he could, even though Merry, who generally was perhaps maybe the more likely to make the plans between the two of them if they're both, completely with it. But Merry had been hit on the head. I think he had an axe wound. So he really wasn't well enough to do that. So Pippin stepped up to the plate. Pippin and Merry, I like the fact they're flawed characters, but they are, they're just, like all the hobbits, they do have a general simple good to them. And that's what the ring, the ring doesn't know what to do with people who don't have a ton of ambition and just want to enjoy their simple lives. And really, Tolkien was writing a love letter to the simpler life. When he describes when the Shire is destroyed, he talks about the old windmill being torn down and, machinery being put up. Tolkien idealized the simpler life. Being able to sit back and enjoy a good meal. And those things that you protect when you go to war. And there's a line for the Faramir says basically the same thing. I don't love the sword. I don't love the sword for its sharpness or I want to say like the arrow for something else. I can't remember. But regardless, he's saying, I don't love these implements of war. I don't love the glory of war. But I love what those things are meant to protect. And that's what Tolkien always wants to bring that back to, is like, what is the purpose of this? Frodo's purpose of leaving was to protect the Shire. It didn't happen the way he wanted it to, but that was his purpose. The Shire was partially what kept them all going. They needed to protect that. They didn't want this evil to reach back to the Shire. Faramir, why is he fighting? He wants to protect that which he loves, that which is good. Yet people like Boromir, who is shown to want glory, to want to really he wanted the glory of war, so he was more easily corrupted by the ring. Which is why Aragorn, who doesn't want the glory, he doesn't, he does want the throne because that is his destiny. That's the only way he can marry Arwen. But his motivations are different. It's not about glory. You see that when he comes to Gondor. He doesn't just come in and say, hey, I'm the king, I'm taking over now. He sneaks in, does the healing he needs to, and then sneaks out again because now is not the time. It is his destiny to rule these people and to take care of them. But it's not to everyone's best interest to do that now. It's not about him. And that's what you see with all the heroes. It's not about them. The ones who stay strong, the ones who don't fall. Denethor was very focused on the glory of Gondor, was very focused on his own glory, in wanting to keep his role and not wanting to give up. He was very proud. And again, that's why he fell. That's what happened to him. He lost hope when there was a belief that Gondor would fall. He could not see that there could be either hope to get it back or something outside of Gondor, because his pride was tied up in Gondor. Because Gondor, the glory of Gondor, was honestly the glory of Denethor as well. Did that make him I think he was, at one point. I think at one point he was probably more like Boromir, but he got hardened. Because Boromir wasn't a bad guy, but he was definitely filled with a desire for glory. You see again with Éowyn. Because she even left the people she was supposed to be leading. Left them even though Theoden said, hey, I need you to take care of them. They voted for you to take care of them. She's like, see you later, I want my glory. Goes off. And she almost gets herself killed. And the side effect, the consequence of her choice to choose glory over her responsibilities was that she nearly died. Witch King. That was the name I was trying to remember. When she, in her fight with the Witch King. And the same thing with Merry, actually. He was told by Theoden, you need to stay here. I don't want you coming to war. Both of them went instead. The consequence of their actions was that they were really seriously wounded by the Witch King. More so Éowyn, though, because she had gotten to the point where she was so tired of putting other people's needs before her own that she decided that she wanted to go out in a blaze of glory. She just was like, it's all about the glory now. But that's empty. Once you get it, then what? What does all the glory bring you? It doesn't really bring you anything. You see it with celebrities all the time. It's like, once you have this, it doesn't really mean anything. So, and you see that with Éowyn until she's able to connect, until Faramir is able to really walk her through to the path, back to the point where she actually decides that she does want to be involved more with healing things and bringing more, not focus on her own glory, but in bringing either healing to others or something like that. It's more focused on hope and others than herself and glory. And that's really an underlying message for Tolkien as well. Consequences to your actions, the effect of mercy, and then if you're, the effect of if you are focused on yourself versus on others, you're going to feel empty, and though it's not going to necessarily work out so well for you because it happens over and over again. So yeah, they're the themes that I enjoy. And he doesn't do allegory. He said that again and again. He didn't like allegory. But there were definite themes throughout his books that were consistent throughout the books, and they were important to the books. Yeah, I think honestly I'm going to focus most on Frodo as a character, even though there are characters I probably enjoy for their humor more. I'm thinking of Gimli. I'm thinking of Sam. even, well, Aragorn doesn't do humor a whole lot, but when he does, I'm actually thinking of Gimli and Sam a lot of times. But there is humor, even from Frodo, at different points during the books, and I enjoy. For a long time, there was a point where I just enjoyed watching or reading the sections with Gimli, Legolas, and Aragorn in the Two Towers, and I think it was even in the Return of the King, because those were the parts that were as light as anything could be in these books, because it's a very dark. The Lord of the Rings is a very dark story, even though there are glimpses of hope, while it's a dark story, it is a story of hope. A hope. I think Sam says at one point, the star shining through the darkness, light in the darkness, and that's a good way of describing the whole idea of these books. There's darkness all around, but there is that little bit of light, that little bit of hope, that goes throughout these books. And for a long time, a lot of the positivity that there might be was with the Legolas, Aragorn, and Gimli sections. Whereas you knew you were getting darker and darker the more you traveled with Frodo and Sam. Frodo was getting more tired. Frodo was really having a hard time. So it could be a very difficult section to read. But Frodo is where all the real drama occurs. Most of what happens with Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas builds up to other things that are to support what Frodo and Sam are doing. But yeah, I'm kind of rambling with all this. So the original question wasn't, let me give you a synopsis of like everything that's awesome with the book. You asked what I like most about Tolkien. So to boil it down, I guess, world building, the themes of consequences for your actions, the themes of focused on others rather than self, focused on self-sacrifice rather than glory is better, and when you focus only on yourself, the consequences tend to be dire. And usually you chose those consequences by your actions. And then the theme of mercy that runs throughout the book. And yes, there's also the books. There's also, a lot of other good character building things. I'm not, I haven't touched on anything like Lothlorien, or even I haven't touched on Aragorn. I love stuff with, at the Prancing Pony. I think it's a really fun period of time, because when you start the Lord of the Rings, you do have a period of time, in spite of everything that's happening, where it's lighter. But the far closer you get to Mordor, the darker it gets. Which makes absolute sense. The ring is trying to protect itself, and you're getting closer and closer to the ultimate battles. But yeah, so I like the themes, and then I do love these characters. They are written in a way that is harder for an audience that's used to the quick, snappy, that's used to a more modern way of writing. But these characters have a lot of depth. They have internal battles. There's a lot of different, and they all have their different cultures, which is amazing, because there's a whole lot of world building, a lot more than a lot of authors use today. So I do appreciate that about Tolkien as well. And I do feel like the little bit I know about the Silmarillion has done so much for me understanding things I didn't understand about the poems that were being read, about why Frodo yelled what he did when he attacked the Nazgul. I think he called he called for one of the I want to say he called for Vanya, the Valinor, Valinor that was for light, because she's very where's my Silmarillion? There it is. Hang on, my screen disappeared. Come back here. Okay. She is the one who's for light, and she's very powerful. The Valinor. Let's see. What is her name? I want to say it's Vanya. And I want to give her, there's a Livatar. So it's one who's married to Monway. There's a section where you go through like who all of them are. There's Tulkas, Firstborn. Okay, there's no. Okay, we're getting to Yavanna. Varda. Sorry, I got her name wrong. Varda. And the elves called her, because it was by the name the elves called it, that Frodo shouted out. Elbereth. So he shouted out Elbereth while he was, a couple times. He did, and then Sam did later. And at the time, you know, when you don't know the lore, you don't understand why this has any meaning. But that is the, you know, Valinor, one of the Valinor that is for light. And Morgoth, you know, he really wanted, they wanted to snuff out light. And to call upon her was very powerful. So I didn't get that until I started reading Silmarillion a little bit. And started listening to Tolkien. So the fact that there's so many levels to reading this, the first time around you might catch some things, but as you get deeper into Tolkien's lore, you realize that there's so many levels to this. You can read this to focus on the current text, or you can read this and go like, okay, now how is this affected by other parts of the Legendarium? I mean, even the fact that there's references to Beren and Luthien at some points, which, again, I didn't know what that was until later. And there's a couple stories. I think there was one about Mordor that he wanted to tell, but I can't remember what that was. It was when they were too close to the Nazgul. So about the time that Frodo got stabbed. Before that. But anyway, yeah, very rambling. I have a lot that I like about it. I didn't plan this at all, as evidenced by the fact that I just went off forever. Yeah, there's a lot in there, and it's a very strong book. You can see Tolkien's worldview, but it also isn't something that he forces upon you. It just happens to be, this is how these good characters act, and this is the rules of this universe, and honestly, the rules of any world of, like, you have actions, they have consequences. That's just the way things work. And a lot of times, if you make a choice that's, you know, contrary to your responsibilities, you know, there's going to be some sort of outcome. Even if the outcome wasn't that Eowyn got injured, there could have been something that happened to the people that she was supposed to defend. There's always consequences to your actions at some point along the line, which I do appreciate. Yeah, there's just so much good in here. Oh, I liked the callback as well. When Gimli asked for the strand of hair, and she gave him 3. Nice callback to Feanor, when he wanted 3 strands of hair from Galadriel for his Silmarils, but she could sense something wrong with him, and she refused to give it to him. So she could sense that Gimli had no evil purpose. There was only good intention. There's only respect in there versus the pride of Feanor. So whereas I think it was actually her uncle, where she denied him, a fellow elf, a family member, she did give this gift, and more than he requested, to Gimli, a dwarf, the sworn enemies, basically, of the elves. So there's just little things peppered throughout that if you are familiar with Legendarium, you kind of get this moment. But yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. I don't think I answered your question at all. Vinod, sorry about all the rambling. This is what happens when I just go off the cuff. I basically always go off the cuff, so this is what happens anytime I record. If anything was unclear, please let me know. I think the only one I really gave a lot of focus on was Frodo. Oh, I appreciate Aragorn more later too. For a long time, I thought Aragorn, I would like Strider, but I didn't like Aragorn because it felt almost like they were two completely different people. And it took, reading later and understanding the circumstances changed. He always was moving toward this. Now he has to act according to what his situation is. But it took quite a while to kind of get the Aragorn Strider to line up together and realize that, yes, they feel like different. They felt like different people initially, but no, they really are the same person. Just circumstances changed. There's so many other things throughout the plot. You don't need me to completely break down everything again for the entire story, but yeah, there's a lot to be loved in this series of books because Tolkien built an in-depth world. He loved this world, and I think he would have never stopped writing Middle-earth. It was very real to him. And anyone who writes does know, you get to a point where you're like, well, this is what the character would say. They told me this. This is how they feel about this. I think Agatha Christie actually talked about, Poirot doesn't like that. She actually talked like Poirot was talking to her. And that's a very common thing when you are very character motivated. Now, Tolkien did have a tendency to have a mixture of character and world motivated. He's actually, in some ways, a bit of an unusual author for me because he focuses on everything. He focuses on the world building. He focuses on the language. He focuses on, and world building, I include the races and the background and all that. Then he focuses on the individual people. Then he focuses on his themes. But the themes just come naturally from who the characters are. So there's a lot going on there than your average author, even someone who's as great as Agatha Christie, but who's not building a story that's of the magnitude and proportion that Tolkien is. Tolkien is building an epic myth. He wanted to make English myths, and he did that, and they're very epic. But I wouldn't necessarily read Tolkien if my brain is tired or I'm having a headache. I'd go to Agatha Christie and read myself a good murder mystery. So, yeah, they're very good for two very different reasons. I love my English authors. I prefer them to be more classic. Agatha Christie's probably one of the later ones that I read. I just don't tend to read much later than that. I like more classic style. But yeah, I don't know what else to say. I probably, if I just sat here and thought a bit more, I could think of a ton more to say, but I don't think any of us want that. So thank you very much for joining me for this ramble through this Middle-earth, and I hope you got something out of that. I kind of feel like I just talked forever about nothing almost. I don't know if that made any sense at all. I hope you got something out of it. Thank you very much for joining me today, and I hope that you have a blessed day. Oh, and if I don't see you again before Thanksgiving, have a wonderful Thanksgiving. God bless. Bye.